as people of color, we have so many things that causes us to feel downward that sometimes we just want to quit. Quitting has been the road for many rich and poor who have opted out to even give themselves another chance. Quitting is a byproduct of life when people are just deep down in the dumps of life. There are things that sometimes hold us back and hinder us, but then the good news is there are those times that we have some high moments in life. As rare as they are, they come and they seem so fleeting at times. Life, my brothers and sisters, is sometimes unpredictable. Ask the average person, they'll tell you more negative things than they can tell you positive things. When we look back at history, we have a whole lot of things that have happened positive in our lives that we need to be proud of. From babies' births to marriages to graduations, job promotions, we have had some celebration in all of our lives. There is this transfiguration of Jesus in our text, that Jesus is transfigured right before the eyes of his three disciples. This is something that they've never seen before. I want to remind somebody, this is the season that God is going to do things in your life that you've never seen before. Sometimes God does extraordinary things right before our eyes to increase our faith. See, the disciples wanted a deeper relationship with Jesus, and I can kind of agree with them. I think we all want a deeper relationship with Jesus. They were yet in his company and didn't feel as close as they wanted to feel. Their proximity for many of us foster the idea of connection. In other words, you can be near Jesus and still not know who Jesus is. Yet, God knows this, and God shows up to help the disciples understand that Jesus is verified from heaven. It's still powerful to know that the biblical Jesus was approved in the eyesight of God. See, when God approves, no devilish deeds can destroy your destiny. When God gives divine stamping of approval upon your life, no weapon formed against you or me shall ever prosper. The power of this pericope is the exposure that is given to the disciples. To witness hearing God's approval of Jesus had to be paramount in their lives. To hear God's voice in the context of where they at is frightening and forceful at the same time. To behold God's vocal presence is life transforming. Let me get a witness here. Come here, Moses. When you were on the backside of the mountain and you heard God's voice, and when you tried to approach God's face, you had to bag up to God's glory because his glory was too much for you to handle. And you went up looking like one Moses, but you came down looking like somebody new. God's voice will transform your life. Isn't it amazing to know that God will intervene to authenticate Jesus' ministry is utterly unique. Nobody else's ministry was authenticated like Jesus. This is important because the disciples were enjoying their mountaintop experience. Being exposed to the elevated position and posture gave them some advantages. Sometimes God has to lift us up and away from the mundane in order to give us exactly what we need to be able to deal with everything that life has for us. See, the elevation also gives them a different view. See, when you are in the heat of the struggle, you don't see things the way everybody else sees it. But when you are lifted up, you can see things a little bit differently when your perspective has been elevated. However, the perch perspective offers them some foresight that the valley does not provide. See, sometimes you can be in the valley for so long that mountaintop experiences can blow your mind. Dr. Frederick Douglass Haynes, pastor of Friendship West Baptist Church in Dallas, Texas. Dallas, Texas, pastor of Friendship West. Dr. Freddie Haynes says it like this: you can be in the valley so long that it feels like looking up, you are still like looking down. Well, here is where it shifts. Before the disciples appears, before their eyes appears Moses and Elijah talking to Jesus. Now, the disciples express no fear at their sighting nor any kind of intimidation. It's amazing. It's amazing. It's amazing. Moses and Elijah shows up on the mountain with Jesus, and they're not scared. But Brother Peter, I like Pete. Me and Pete got a whole lot in common. I like Brother Pete. The rogue disciple, the gangster, the fierce fisherman speaks, and he says, listen to what he says. Lord, it really is good for us to be here. I mean, hey, we up here on the mountain. We got you, we got Moses, we got Elijah here, and God, it's good for us to be here. But Peter is the same Peter that over in chapter number 16 of Matthew, that Jesus helps him to understand that his revelation that he received only came by God revealing it unto him. Remember when Jesus asked the question, who do men say that I am? And some of them say this, and some of them say that. Some of them say this, and some of them say that. He said, but who do you say I am? And then Peter, old bold Peter, said, thou art the Christ, the Son of the living God. And he said, Jesus responded to him. He said, Peter, flesh and blood did not reveal that to you. That was revealed to you by my Father. He said, but now, Simon, I'm going to change your name to Peter, because upon that rock I shall build my church. Now, listen. Brother Peter is also designated as the key holder to the kingdom of heaven. Peter has been declared somebody in the work of the Lord. Peter is chosen. Peter is handpicked. Peter now has definition for his life. But in our text, Peter wants to build monuments for the past, for the present, as a process to get him into the future. He wants to build monuments or tabernacles in honor of Moses, Jesus, and Elijah. Peter is looking to have status and statues that emulate power and success. I'm going to get in trouble right here because I need to help somebody. Could it be that this perspective of seeking status and power has corrupted our democracy in America? Let me talk to you. Let me consider this perspective. We have monuments across this nation that memorialize men who were enslavers, slavery promoters, and slavery profiteers. We have monuments that suggest the people of color are not worthy to be looked up to unless they are hanging from a tree. These represents power, control, and dominance. They were erected to remind white people of their conquest and to remind black people that they had been conquered. I need to bag this thing up because somebody ain't hear me. But I bet that the racists of the past have turned over in their graves more than a few times after President Barack Obama was in office 2 terms in a row. But also, I know now they are raised in hell with the devil because now a black woman sits as Madam VP of the United States of America. The same people you deny are the same people that God has elevated. The late Dr. William Henry Jernigan said it this way. He said, we are compelled by duty as followers of Jesus Christ to promote goodwill and increase the spirit and practice of democracy. We must contend with the tension of power struggles at every level of our democracy that we can fathom. Whether it's clean water, fresh food, land preservation, or community activism, the struggle is real. It goes from voting rights to civil rights. The tension is real. The 10th pastor of Mount Carmel Baptist Church, Washington, D.C., Dr. Joseph Evans, said this recently. Voting rights is code language for economic empowerment rights. They know that if we have the vote, we have the power, and if we have the power, we can get to economics. You missed your shout cue right there. I'm trying to help somebody to understand that it shows up no matter where we look in health challenges, wealth management, or just walking in the public square. The weight on being black in America is heavy on all of us. But Paul, helps us to understand over in Ephesians 6 and 12, for we wrestle not against flesh and blood, but against principalities, against powers, against rulers of darkness of this world, against spiritual wickedness and high places. I'm trying to tell somebody the struggle is real. However, you ever heard that old thing that used to come on ABC? Conjunction, junction, what's your function? Oh, I got a but conjunction right here. But God shows up and shows out. God does not rebuke the disciples. God accepts Peter's request. God instead does only what God can do. God declares that Jesus is approved from heaven and he is God's approved son. However, the sermon the disciples respond is where I want to pitch my tent. See, they didn't have a problem when Moses and Elijah showed up. When God speaks, the disciples do three things. They hear, they fall on their faces, and the Bible says that they were sore afraid, which means they were highly alarmed or placed in reverential obedience. In other words, they were scared, stiff, and they did not know what to do. While I argue that God's voice is startling, a cause to pause from what we are doing, God's voice must be heard and acted upon. Let me push my point. God has not stopped speaking or not stopped being heard from his people. God is speaking to somebody right now. God is using my little feeble voice to speak to your situation. God can still speak from heaven without human intervention, but God has called us to speak on his behalf. God is using my human means to reach you no matter where you are. Why? Because the posture of the disciples was what? Face down to the ground. The disciples went from wanting to build tabernacles for heroes of the past and heroes that were with them. They went from their mountaintop experience, the better view for them to follow as disciples, but stagnated by the revelation that they were now scared to do some work. I'm trying to help somebody. Don't be scared of God's revelation in your life, because it is only God's revelation that you're going to have to be able to hold on to keep pushing you through all this stuff we have to deal with. When God gives his divine revelation, that's the time to work. God speaks, and that's all that we need to do to get our work done. So I want to get to my point here, and I promise you I'm going to get out of your way. What does God do when we have allowed the revelation to create fear and stagnation in our lives? I want to suggest that when revelation causes us to develop stagnation, God uses a three-dimensional motif that moves us from stagnation to activation, from activation to participation, and from participation to demonstration. I'm going to get out of your way. I promise you. I promise you here. Here it is. Number one, God does what only God can do. When we are stuck from revelation, God gives us what is called motivated activation. God speaks again through Jesus' touch. The thing that blew my mind was while they were scared and fearful, God still spoke to them, but this time Jesus put his hands on them. To know that God's presence is in your life is a beautiful thing. We agree. Amen. To know that God has his hands on you no matter the situation you are in can be life-changing. But to know that God has placed his hands on us to do the work that he has had us to do is mind-blowing, if nothing else. Jesus saw what was going on with them, and before he said anything to them, he put his hands on them. Let me get out of here because this is getting good to me already. We are gifted by God to have God's anointing in our life. That means that God's hand is on us. Do you know that there's nothing that you can't do with God's hand on you? Don't you know that there is nothing that cannot take place in your life unless God put his hands on you? And you know that everything that you've already done is because why? God has had his hands on you, you would have quit a long time ago had not the Lord touched you. You would have threw up your hands and given up a long time ago if God hadn't put his hands on you. You would have never gotten that job. You would have never got that promotion because you were scared of revelation. But God what? Put his hands on you. I don't know about you, but every now and then I like the Lord to just come by and remind me that he can put his hands on me. I like the Lord to remind me that every now and then when it seems like there's too much hanging over my head and hanging on my plate, that God will put his hands on me to tell me to keep on going. Not only does God move us to activation, but God also empowers our participation. Listen to this. Jesus speaks a word, and he says this, arise. To hear God speak directly into our lives when we need it is really empowering.